They say you should never let your job define you. But when you're a single father trying to rebuild your life one unpaid bill at a time, sometimes your career feels like the only stable ground left beneath your feet. My name's Jack Thompson. I'm 42 years old, and up until last week, I was the senior project strategist at Anderson & Cole, a fast-growing consulting firm based in Manhattan. For 5 years, I was the guy behind the scenes, turning chaos into structure, piecing together high-stakes strategies that landed us multi-million-dollar deals. Most recently, I built the proposal that locked down the $20 million Faulkner Industries account, the biggest contract the firm had ever landed. Not that it mattered, because now, according to the exit paperwork that had just been shoved across a mahogany desk in a corner office smelling of stale espresso and fake charm, I was no longer needed. "Don't take it personally," my boss said as he leaned back in his leather chair. "Arms crossed like this was just another Tuesday. It's just restructuring. Fresh blood, new energy. You know the game." But I didn't. Not like this. Not after the countless late nights, the holidays I skipped with my son Ethan, the takeout meals reheated on an empty stomach just to make one last adjustment before deadline. I'd given them everything, my brain, my time, my loyalty. Now I was being handed a generic HR folder and an insult thinly disguised as corporate language. I didn't flinch, didn't let my hands tremble, even though my heart pounded like a warning siren in my chest. I took a breath, sat up straighter, looked him square in the eye. "Thank you for the opportunity," I said. His eyebrows lifted, surprised. Maybe he expected yelling, or begging, or the kind of scene you hear about in office gossip. But I'd been through worse than this. When you've rebuilt your life from ashes once, you know how to walk away from burning buildings without turning back. I left that office with my head high. Even when the HR associate I barely knew escorted me to the elevator like I was a criminal. Even when my key card was deactivated before the elevator doors even opened. Even when I sat in my car for nearly an hour in the garage beneath the building, staring through the windshield while snow fell silently onto the hood. It wasn't just the firing that crushed me. It was the betrayal. Because 2 weeks earlier, I had handed over the completed Faulkner proposal. 3 months of work, pages of research, growth models, detailed projections, and strategic risks, all crafted by me alone. I'd worked on it through bronchitis, through missed dinners with Ethan, through sleepless nights. And a day before the presentation, I saw the final version printed on my boss's desk. My name was gone. "This is just how things work," he said when I confronted him. "You'll get credit internally." I wanted to believe him. I needed the job. Ethan's braces weren't going to pay for themselves. So I let it slide. And now, here I was, out of a job, out of credit, out of patience. I drove home in silence, the kind that hums in your bones. I didn't turn on music. I didn't call anyone. Just kept thinking about Ethan, about the bills piling up, about the future that had just evaporated in a single breath. That night, after I tucked Ethan into bed and watched him fall asleep, still clutching the book we'd started but never finished, I opened my personal laptop, logged into my cloud archive. I hadn't been planning for this moment, but something in me had always believed in backing up my work. Every version of the proposal, every email, every timestamp, and one name sat at the top of my contact list, waiting like a long-forgotten promise: Sophia Lynn. We'd worked together years ago, back when she was still running a modest startup. She once told me, "If you ever get tired of building someone else's legacy, give me a call." I never did. Until now. I clicked compose. The subject line was short: "The real author of your proposal." The cursor blinked at me like it was daring me to back down. My fingers hovered above the keyboard, my heart thudding with a quiet intensity one hadn't felt since my divorce. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was something deeper, a recognition that once I sent this email, I couldn't unring the bell. To Sophia Lynn. Subject: the real author of your proposal. I started typing. "Hi, Sophia. I hope you're well. You may not remember me, but we worked together back in your startup days during your Series B round. I'm writing because I recently left Anderson & Cole, and there's something you need to know about the Faulkner proposal you received. The document you were presented wasn't authored by the person who pitched it. It was mine, created over 3 months of strategy, modeling, and refinement. I can prove every part of it. I believe it's only fair you hear the full story. Jack Thompson. I attached the proposal drafts. Every time-stamped version. Every annotated slide. Even the original sketch on a notepad I'd scanned months earlier. And then, with a breath that felt like letting go of everything I carried too long, I hit send. For a moment, nothing happened. The room was still. Outside, New York was buried in February snow, softening the chaos for once. I closed the laptop slowly, leaned back in my chair, and stared up at the cracked ceiling above my tiny apartment in Queens. What now? I didn't know if Sophia would respond. Hell, I didn't know if she'd even remember me. People at her level were constantly pitched, flattered, used. I didn't expect her to wade into someone else's corporate mess. But I also knew something about her that others didn't. She hated being lied to. That night, sleep evaded me. I kept glancing at the door, as if a knock might come from someone at Anderson and Cole telling me to stop. But no one came. Ethan slept in the next room, his soft breathing a quiet reminder of why I couldn't afford to give up. At 7:02 a.m., my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen in 6 years. Sophia Lynn. Jack, of course I remember you. I still use the growth model you built for our beer round. Thank you for reaching out. Let's talk. I have some questions and an opportunity one think you'll want to hear about. I sat up so fast I nearly knocked over my coffee. Sophia Lynn wasn't just the CEO of Faulkner Industries. She was becoming something of a legend in tech circles, a leader known for doing things by the book, even when it was inconvenient. If she was reaching out, this wasn't charity. This was curiosity, maybe even justice. We spoke later that afternoon. Her assistant connected us directly. No wait time. No buffer. Jack, she said. Her voice was smooth but clipped professional. I've reviewed everything you sent me. There was a long pause, and I braced myself. I'm livid, she said bluntly, and I wanted to walk me through exactly how this happened. I did. I explained the lead-up, the handoff, the quiet erasure of my name. She asked tough questions about the methodology, the structure, even why I hadn't fought back sooner. I answered them all, not because I had prepared some speech, but because the work was mine. Every calculation, every assumption, every line of logic. You built this, she said finally. It's all over the proposal, your thought process, your phrasing, your pacing. I knew it felt familiar. There was another pause. I'm terminating the contract with Anderson and Cole, she said. Effective immediately. I blinked. Are you sure? I don't work with liars, she replied. And I don't reward theft. But I also don't believe in wasting good work. We still need this strategy implemented. I'm launching a new venture, and I want you to lead it. As partner and CEO. It felt like I was underwater. Everything muffled, surreal. CEO? Me? I paused, stunned. I need to think about it. Understand, she said. But don't take too long. You deserve more than being a footnote in someone else's success story. We ended the call. I just sat there, holding my phone in both hands like it might evaporate. Me, CEO. All those nights I'd worked silently while someone else took the credit. All the times I'd told myself, maybe next time, and now, someone finally saw me. I didn't say yes immediately, but my heart already had. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was worried, quite the opposite. It was adrenaline. The kind that hums in your bloodstream when the scales finally start to balance. For the first time in years, I felt like I was on the verge of something. Not just survival, but significance. The next morning, I sat Ethan down at the kitchen table. He was still rubbing sleep from his eyes, spooning cereal without much enthusiasm. Hey, bud, I said gently, I need to tell you something. He looked up, spoon paused midair. I got let go from work. His eyes widened, cereal forgotten. Wait, they fired you? But you're the smartest person I know. I forced a smile. It's complicated, but I've got a new opportunity. A better one where I get to call the shots. His brow furrowed, the way it always did when he was thinking hard. You're going to start your own company? Something like that. He didn't say much after that, just nodded slowly. But later that evening, I saw him Googling what does a CEO do. It made me chuckle, and ache a little too. At 9:30 the next morning, I called Sophia. I'm in. Good, she said without missing a beat. Your title is CEO of Lynn and Thompson Strategies. Paperwork is already being prepared. We'll go public next week. That afternoon, the headlines dropped. Faulkner Industries cancels contract with Anderson and Cole. Leadership credibility cited. Anderson and Cole had no idea what hit them. I imagine Matt, my former boss, reading the article from his glass office, probably still sipping that overpriced roast and pretending he had everything under control. But the look on his face? I hoped it stung. Because this wasn't just about losing a client. It was about losing the client. The one I had brought in. The one that had defined our quarter, our projections, our future. The fallout came faster than I expected. The next day, Matt's assistant emailed Sophia in a panic, trying to clarify the misunderstanding. She forwarded me the email with a short note. "He wants to talk to the CEO. Your move." I didn't hesitate. The call was scheduled for 11 a.m. sharp. When it connected, I heard his voice, calm on the surface, but with an unmistakable edge of desperation. "Jack?" he asked, clearly caught off guard. "I wasn't expecting you." "I figured," I replied evenly. "You asked to speak with the CEO of Lynn and Thompson." "That's me now." There was a pause, and then that weak, condescending chuckle he always used when he felt outmatched. "Look," he said, "there's clearly been a misunderstanding. Had I known you were still involved, I would have handled things differently." "Really?" I asked, tone sharp. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you took my work, erased my name, and then fire me. That doesn't seem like a misunderstanding. That seems like intent." Another pause. Then the defensive tone crept in. "I was under pressure, Jack. The board wanted cuts. I had to make some tough calls. And honestly, you were always talented. But leadership wasn't your strong suit." That one cut deeper than I expected. Not because it was true, but because I'd heard it so many times before. Not assertive enough. Too quiet. Too methodical. Always competent, but never quite enough. I swallowed the anger, steadied my voice. "You made a mistake, Matt. And I'm not just talking about firing me. I'm talking about assuming I'd stay quiet. About underestimating the people who make the work happen while you take the credit." There was a long silence. Then he said, "You used to be different. You used to be grateful." Grateful. That word. As if everything I'd achieved had been gifted to me out of pity. As if I hadn't earned every late night, every breakthrough, every win. I was never grateful for how I was treated. I said, calm but firm. I was committed. I was loyal. But that ended when you decided I was expendable. I ended the call. I stared out my apartment window for a long time after that, watching the sunlight reflect off the glass towers of Midtown. That man had tried to erase me, had tried to bury my name under his ambition. But I was still here. And now, I was the one with the pen. The day after the call with Matt, something shifted. Not in the news, not in the markets, but in the silence, the kind you feel more than hear, the kind that precedes storms. Sophia and I met at her downtown office that afternoon. The space was nothing like the high-rise ego traps I was used to. It was sleek, open, bright, filled with people who didn't look like they were playing corporate chess, but actually building something real. As I finished telling her about the call with Matt, she set her coffee down and said, "You handled that perfectly. But brace yourself. People like him don't disappear quietly." She wasn't wrong. By Thursday, I was hearing whispers. It started on LinkedIn, then Slack channels, then from a former colleague who still worked at Anderson and Cole. Matt had begun rewriting the narrative. The version he was pushing painted me as bitter, unstable, not a team player. According to him, I had underperformed and left voluntarily. The Faulkner deal? That was his vision. I had just been support. It was textbook damage control, vague enough to be denied, but specific enough to cast out. At first, it made my stomach turn. The idea that I could be smeared that easily after everything I'd done. But the anger didn't last long. Because that same evening, I got a message from Julia. She'd been a junior strategist when I mentored her. Bright, passionate, and constantly told to tone it down by the same men who kept promoting each other. "Jack, I don't know if you've seen what's being said, but I want you to know I've got your back. We all know the truth. If you ever need a witness, I'm in." That hit harder than I expected. And she wasn't the only one. Over the next 2 days, I got more than a dozen messages, calls, even voice notes from former coworkers. People who had worked beside me, under me, even some who had silently survived the toxic culture, by keeping their heads down. Each one told a different version of the same story. Credit taken. Promotions denied. Evaluations adjusted. Meetings where they were talked over, dismissed, or outright ignored. They weren't reaching out because I had become some symbol. They were reaching out because they were tired. Because someone had finally said what they had all been too afraid to say. "You were the first to walk away," Julia said in one call. "But now that you have, some of us are ready to follow." It wasn't just support. It was evidence. I started collecting everything: screenshots, emails, Slack messages, old project logs. I didn't have to dig. People sent them freely. No pressure, no agenda, just a quiet, collective rebellion against years of manipulation. There was a memo from a senior partner I'd worked under, praising my leadership on the Faulkner project just 2 weeks before I was fired. There were performance reviews with inconsistencies, comments that had been changed from exceeds expectations to meets expectations without explanation. And then there were the messages. They told me not to put your name on the deck. He said you were too valuable to lose, but not executive material. We all knew what was happening. We just didn't know what to do about it. It wasn't just a few people. It was a pattern. And the board at Anderson & Cole was beginning to feel it too. The following Monday, I received an anonymous message in my inbox. No name, just this: "Jack, this is confidential, but the board is investigating leadership conduct. Several partners have raised concerns about how key accounts, including Faulkner, were handled. You didn't just leave. You exposed something we've been ignoring for too long." Anonymous. I read it 3 times, hand steady, breath calm. I hadn't set out to take anyone down. I just wanted to take back what was mine. But sometimes, exposing the truth means dismantling a system that only works because everyone agrees not to look too closely. That week, Lynn and Thompson Strategies signed its second client. Anderson & Cole. Their stock dipped 6%. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small. I felt seen. I felt ready. Friday morning, I was in the middle of drafting a recruitment proposal when my phone rang. Dana Klein, my attorney and longtime friend, sounded sharper than usual, like she'd already read something that would piss me off. "You're not going to like this," she said. I leaned back in my chair, closing my laptop slowly. "Go ahead. Anderson & Cole just filed a cease and desist against you." I paused, blinking. "On what grounds?" "Claiming you used proprietary information from your time at the firm to poach their client and launch your own company." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was exactly the kind of stunt Matt would pull when he was cornered. The man couldn't lead with vision, so he led with intimidation. "You mean the client whose proposal I personally authored? Who was already my contact before I even joined Anderson & Cole?" Dana chuckled, dry and knowing. "Yep, that's the one. It's a scare tactic. They're hoping you'll fold, or at least panic. They don't know me very well then." "No, they don't. And that's their problem. But I want us to go on offense. We're preparing a counterclaim, defamation, wrongful termination, and professional misrepresentation. We've already got signed statements from 5 former employees backing your account. The idea of suing the company that had once been my entire life didn't scare me. It felt necessary. It felt like closure knocking with legal precision. But what surprised me most wasn't the lawsuit itself. It was the people who started showing up for me. That night, I got a message from Nathan, one of the senior analysts I had trained during his first year at the firm. A guy who had always stayed out of office politics, kept his head down, and hid his metrics. "Jack, I've been quiet too long. We all knew what Matt was doing. You were the reason our strategies worked. He just took the glory." Attached is a timeline of project documents, showing where your name was removed or replaced. Use it if you need to. Attached was a spreadsheet meticulously tracking every major project I'd worked on, before and after Matt began his restructuring. It showed edits, metadata, file histories. It was damning. Then came Alicia. She'd worked in HR before leaving the firm 6 months prior. Always kind, always professional, and always silent. Until now. "Jack, you probably don't remember this, but I used to be the one finalizing your quarterly reviews. Matt pushed hard to revise your ratings the quarter before you were let go. The original draft had you at exceeds expectations. He changed it to meets expectations and had me send it out before the board reviewed. I still have the originals. If you need them, they're yours. I sat with that for a long time. Even when you think you've prepared yourself for the worst, there's something uniquely awful about seeing proof that the damage wasn't accidental. It was engineered, deliberate, calculated. I had been targeted not for failing, but for being good enough to threaten the wrong man's position. Dana moved fast. Within 3 days, we filed a counterclaim and submitted our supporting evidence. 5 statements, dozens of emails, document history logs, original versions of proposals with metadata intact. By the end of the week, Anderson and Cole quietly withdrew the cease and desist. No apology, no explanation, just gone. It was the clearest confession I could have asked for. That Friday, Sophia and I stood in front of a packed conference room full of potential investors. We were presenting the official launch deck for Lynn and Thompson Strategies. I watched the faces in the room. Corporate veterans, venture capitalists, former executives. They weren't just listening. They were leaning forward, focused. We weren't pitching buzzwords. We weren't selling smoke and mirrors. We were offering something radical in its simplicity, strategy with integrity. No theft, no spin, no corporate theater, just results. We closed 2 contracts that day. After the final handshake, I stepped into the elevator and let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building on my terms. Later that night, I picked up Ethan from his friend's house. He hopped in the passenger seat, still wearing his school-issued hoodie. "How was your day?" I asked. He buckled in, then turned to me. "My teacher asked who inspires us." I said you. My grip on the steering wheel tightened for a second. "Why me?" "Because you didn't let them win. And because now you're the boss." I smiled as we drove home through the dark, the city glowing all around us. I was the boss, and this was just the beginning. The following Monday started like any other: coffee, headlines, inbox overflow. But that illusion didn't last long. Around 10 a.m., my phone buzzed with a new notification from an unknown sender. The subject line read, "Thought you'd want to see this." Attached was a PDF. Anonymous source. No message, just a file. I hesitated before opening it. Inside, a partial board memo from Anderson and Cole, marked confidential, in which Matt discussed using selective restructuring to quietly replace high-risk personnel before their upcoming investor roadshow. High risk, not underperforming, not redundant. High risk, as in people who knew too much, people who might rock the boat, people like me. The document laid out a playbook: adjust performance reviews, deny promotions quietly, let go of strategic liabilities without attracting attention. There was in black and white, strategy by sabotage. I stared at the screen for a long time, jaw clenched. Not in disbelief. I already knew what they'd done. But seeing it confirmed, in their own words, that changed everything. I forwarded it to Dana. 3 minutes later, she called. "This needs to go public." My stomach dropped. "You're serious?" "This isn't about you anymore, Jack. This is systemic. If we don't shine a light on it, who will?" I didn't answer right away, because she was right, and that terrified me. Going public meant scrutiny. Headlines. Being labeled a whistleblower. In a world where loyalty to the company is expected to be absolute, stepping outside the line isn't noble. It's seen as treason. But then I thought about Nathan, about Alicia, about Julia, about the dozen voices who had trusted me with their stories, hoping someone would speak up. And I thought about Ethan. What example would I set if I stayed silent now? I looked out the window of my home office. The skyline of New York glimmered against the winter sky. I took a deep breath. "Do it," I said. "Let's go public." That weekend, Dana and I worked around the clock. We triple-checked every document, every date, every quote. We compiled evidence into a clean, time-stamped, lawyer-proof narrative. On Monday morning, we submitted the full file to the Wall Street Ledger, one of the few outlets left with teeth. We also filed formal complaints with the New York State Department of Labor and the SEC, citing not just my case, but a documented pattern of manipulation, retaliation, and misrepresentation of performance data to investors. I thought I'd feel fear, but when the article went live, I felt only clarity. Consulting giant accused of systemic retaliation. Internal docs leak. Former strategist Jack Thompson sparks industry reckoning. The piece was brutal. Fair but brutal. It laid out the timeline. It named names. And it included excerpts from the leaked memos. Within hours, my inbox exploded. Journalists, former employees, lawyers, consultants from firms across the country. People I didn't even know were reaching out. Thank you for speaking up. Your story is mine. Same script, different names. I've been silent for too long. Not anymore. Even people I hadn't heard from in years sent messages of support. It was overwhelming. Not because of the volume, but because for the first time, the truth wasn't just mine, it was ours. By Wednesday, Anderson and Cole's leadership had gone dark. No tweets, no posts, no spin. Matt's LinkedIn profile, quietly deactivated. No announcement, no farewell post. Just vanished. Sophia walked into my office that afternoon, holding 2 coffees and a grin that said more than words could. You broke the internet, she said, setting a cup on my desk. I raised an eyebrow. Didn't mean to. Exactly why it worked. She studied me for a moment. How are you really? I paused. Thought about it. Exhausted, I admitted, but stronger than I've ever felt. Good, she said softly, because the ripple effect hasn't even started yet. She was right. Within days, 2 high-level execs from Anderson and Cole resigned. A former HR director came forward confirming everything. The review tampering, the silent terminations, the pressure to manipulate outcomes. The firm announced an internal audit and promised top-to-bottom restructuring. But to me, the most powerful thing wasn't in their statement. It was in a single message I received that Friday from a woman in Minneapolis I had never met. Jack, I worked in this industry for 17 years. I thought I was crazy, that maybe it was me. Your story reminded me that I'm not alone. You didn't just reclaim your voice. You gave the rest of us permission to find ours too. Thank you. I stared at that message for a long time. Then I stood up, stepped to the window, and let it all sink in. The truth had finally come to light, and we were just getting started. By the end of that week, the media had done what it does best, turn chaos into a headline cycle. I was everywhere. Podcasts, newsletters, even a segment on a business news show I'd only ever watched in the background while brushing my teeth. Most of them called me the disruptor, the accidental whistleblower, or worse, the guy who got revenge on his old firm. But revenge had never been the goal. Recognition? Sure. Accountability? Absolutely. But if I'd wanted revenge, I wouldn't have chosen a paper trail. I would have chosen fire. It was around that time I received a message that felt different from all the others. From Nina Rhodes. Subject, coffee? I stared at the screen. Nina Rhodes, former co-founder of Anderson and Cole. The woman whose name used to be on the office door. She had retired quietly years ago, long before things at the firm started rotting from the inside out. I hadn't spoken to her once in my 5 years there, but her name still carried weight. Everyone knew she'd built the company's original reputation. Competent, ethical, sharp. I responded with a single line. Name a time and place. We met 2 days later at a quiet cafe in Soho, tucked between an art gallery and a bookstore. No PR, no assistance. Just 2 people with overlapping history and different scars. She looked older than I remembered, but not weaker. Her posture was still straight, her voice low but firm. We talked briefly, catching up, trading safe observations, until she pulled a small black flash drive from her coat pocket and placed it gently on the table. I kept this, she said. Didn't know why at the time. Maybe I do now. I picked it up slowly. What is it? Internal evaluations. Board memos. Strategy decks. Meeting transcripts. All from my last 6 months at the firm. You'll find patterns. Manipulations. Warnings that were ignored. Including early conversations about replacing staff before IPO consideration. You weren't the only one they tried to erase, Jack. You were just the first one who didn't let them. I felt a wave rise in my chest. Gratitude. Sadness. Fury. Why now? I asked, my voice hoarse. She looked down at her tea, then back up at me. Because I saw the article. And because I saw what you did with it. I should have said something back then. But I didn't. You reminded me what real leadership looks like. Not control. Not silence. Courage. I nodded, unsure how to respond. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I had to. That night, I went home, poured a glass of whiskey, and opened the flash drive on my personal laptop. It was worse and more validating than I expected. There were performance review drafts that had been altered post-submission, replacing praise with generic bullet points. There were transcripts of meetings where Matt openly suggested laying off senior staff to quiet the buzz during PR crises. There were slide decks with phrases like phase out high-visibility risk and preserve optics ahead of funding window. I wasn't a risk because I underperformed. I was a risk because I performed too well, because I asked questions, because I wasn't easy to push around. And now I had the proof. I sent it to Dana with a short message. We need to take this public. This goes beyond me. Her reply came within 5 minutes. Agreed. I'll prepare a statement. We'll brief the press by Friday. Be ready. I was ready. Or at least, I was no longer afraid. That week, the whispers inside Anderson and Cole turned into alarms. 3 more employees went on record. 2 senior partners stepped down. And the flash drive? It became the centerpiece of a second expose. This time not just about my story, but about a culture that had quietly consumed an entire firm from the inside out. What started as a stolen proposal had become something bigger. A reckoning. Sophia and I sat together in our office watching the second article go live. She looked at me, smiling quietly. You know this doesn't happen often, right? The truth actually getting out? I nodded. I know. She leaned back in her chair. So what are you going to do with it now? I looked down at my hands, then out the window. What started as a fight for credit had become something else. Something undeniable. I'm going to build something better, I said. And I'm not doing it alone. The public fallout came faster than even Dana predicted. 3 days after the second expose dropped, this one headlined, Silence as Strategy, how Anderson and Cole engineered loyalty through fear. Anderson and Cole's investor line shut down. Their website went under maintenance. Their social media accounts stopped posting. And I was nowhere to be found. It was almost poetic, but I didn't have time to gloat. I was too busy hiring. Lynn and Thompson was growing fast. Maybe too fast. I was getting resumes from consultants I used to dream of working with, senior strategists, analytics leads, even a few ex-Anderson folks looking to start over. Our inbox overflowed with partnership requests, media interviews, and speaking engagements. Still, in the middle of all the motion, one email stood out. It was from a university in Boston. They wanted me to speak at their annual Leadership in Business Summit. The keynote title, How to Be the Architect of Your Own Power. I stared at that sentence for a long time, not because it flattered me, but because of how far I had come from being the guy in the corner office who quietly made everyone else look good. That night, Ethan and I sat on the couch, a pizza box between us, ESPN murmuring in the background. He was doing math homework with one hand and devouring pepperoni slices with the other. I'm going to Boston next month, I told him casually, to give a speech. He looked up, like on stage. Yeah, at a business school. He smiled. Cool. You nervous? I thought about that for a moment. Not really. I think I'm finally saying the thing I wish someone had said to me years ago. He nodded thoughtfully, then went back to his homework. The next morning, Dana sent over a draft of our public statement. It wasn't just about retaliation anymore. It was about setting a precedent. We were filing formal ethics complaints with the National Consulting Association, submitting documentation to investor advocacy boards, and proposing new whistleblower protections for the industry. But Matt wasn't done yet. He resurfaced on a popular business podcast 2 days later. I didn't even listen to the whole thing, just enough to hear the part where he said, "We live in a world where people love to point fingers. I've made mistakes. We all have. But sometimes people misinterpret decisions that are simply part of leading a company." It was classic Matt, measured, rehearsed, and dripping with corporate non-apologies. I could have responded, could have tweeted, could have gone on a podcast of my own. But instead, I opened a Google Doc and started writing my summit speech. I wasn't going to waste my breath arguing with someone who never listened in the first place. But the universe has a funny way of finishing what it starts. That weekend, I received another message. This time from Nina Rhodes again. But she wasn't alone. This time, she'd gathered 4 former partners, quiet resignations from the past few years. Women and men who had all left the firm before things fell apart. Each had their own documents, transcripts, memos, all of it painting the same picture, a slow erosion of ethics, engineered behind a polished logo. We met in a quiet conference room above a co-working space in Brooklyn. No cameras, no press, just files and faces. They were tired but ready. "This isn't just about getting justice for you," Nina said. "It's about protecting everyone who still believes that good work should be enough." And so, we made a decision. No more leaks. No more anonymous sources. A full legal filing, signed, sealed, and public. Dana called it a line in the sand. If Anderson and Cole wanted a fight, they were going to get it, with a trail of evidence they couldn't bury and a coalition they couldn't smear. The next morning, we held a press conference. Just 15 minutes. Just the truth. Anderson and Cole issued a frantic rebuttal that afternoon. But it was too late. The momentum had shifted. And for the first time in my life, I was no longer surviving a system. I was helping dismantle it, brick by brick, word by word. And the best part? I wasn't doing it alone anymore. The morning after the press conference, I woke up to more than 200 emails. Some were from journalists. Others came from whistleblowers across industries, tech, finance, education, all echoing the same feeling. This isn't just about consulting. This is everywhere. But the one that stuck with me wasn't from a stranger. It was from Julia. "Jack, I just gave notice. It's time." You walking away gave the rest of us permission to ask what we've been afraid to ask. Is it really worth staying where we're invisible? I'm joining a nonprofit in Chicago that helps train women in underrepresented fields. Thank you for the push. You didn't just stand up for yourself. You stood up for all of us. Jay, I reread that email 5 times. She was one of the brightest minds I'd ever worked with. And now she was finally choosing her path. Her words hit deeper than the headlines, the hashtags, or even the court filings. Because this wasn't about one man, one company, or one viral story anymore. This was about people remembering their worth. Meanwhile, Lynn and Thompson was no longer just a new firm with a good story. It was becoming a movement. We moved into our first official office in Lower Manhattan, just a few blocks from the firm that once told me I'd never be leadership material. Our new space wasn't flashy, exposed brick, modular desks, lots of plants. But it felt alive, the kind of place where people didn't wear masks to fit in. Some of our early hires came from Sophia's network. Others came from the ashes of Anderson and Cole. People who'd quietly packed up their dignity and walked away. We weren't just building a business. We were building something right. During one of our early leadership meetings, our operations lead, a former strategy director named Priya, said something that stuck with me. We don't just need a better model. We need to unlearn the old one. And that became our internal mantra. No more forced hierarchy. No more promotions based on silence. No more treating integrity like a liability. We put in place transparency tools, open review systems, anonymous reporting channels, leadership rotation programs. Not as PR tricks, but because we'd lived through the consequences of not doing it. People noticed. By our 3rd month, we had 6 active clients, 2 of them Fortune 100 companies. Not because we had the biggest pitch decks or the fanciest logo, but because we were the only firm that could say, without flinching, that we practiced what we preached. Still, some wounds hadn't fully closed. One night, around 11 p.m., I sat alone in my office, reviewing a proposal, when an email notification popped up. From Matt. No subject, just a 2-line message. "You made your point. I hope it was worth it." I stared at it for a long time. Not because I was unsure of the answer, but because I was surprised he still didn't get it. This wasn't about proving a point. It was about proving a path. A path for people who had been told to shrink, to wait, to stay silent. People like me. I didn't reply. I deleted the email and turned off the light. The next morning, we held our first story circle, an internal tradition we'd started, an open floor meeting where anyone could share a moment of resilience or failure that shaped them. That day, it was my turn. I told the team about a day 5 years ago when I'd worked 16 hours straight on a proposal, only to be told by Matt, "You're not here to lead. You're here to support." I told them how I believed that lie for years, how it shaped me, how it nearly broke me. And then I told them what I wish someone had told me back then. You don't need permission to matter. You don't need a title to lead. And you sure as hell don't need to let someone else define your value. The room was quiet when I finished, but it wasn't awkward silence. It was understanding. That afternoon, someone taped a sign above the coffee machine. It read, "We build with truth." It stayed there. Still does. Because in a world full of polished lies and curated personas, we were proving that integrity doesn't have to be a liability. It could be your legacy. It was a Friday evening in early spring when Ethan and I sat out on the fire escape outside our apartment, the city humming beneath us like a living memory. The sun dipped behind the skyline, casting warm gold over rusted pipes and weathered brick. He leaned back against the railing, legs swinging over the edge, a popsicle in hand like he didn't have a care in the world. "You're on the news again," he said, without looking at me. I laughed. "You sound like you're getting tired of it." He shook his head. "Not really. I think it's kind of cool." "Kinda. Okay." He smirked. "Very." Then he looked at me with that same serious expression he'd had the night I told him I was fired. Only this time, there was no fear in his eyes. "You didn't let them treat you like you didn't matter," he said. And that's when I knew it was never really about the job, or the lawsuit, or the headlines. It was about this moment, this version of me, the one my son could point to and say, "That's who I come from." Later that night, after Ethan had fallen asleep, I sat at my desk reviewing a new offer. A national nonprofit was asking me to serve on its ethics advisory board. Another message invited me to mentor a fellowship for first-gen college grads breaking into consulting. A university in D.C. wanted to adapt my story into a case study. It felt surreal. All of it. Not long ago, I was sitting alone in my car, gripping the steering wheel, wondering how I was going to pay rent. And now the world was asking for my voice. But what meant more than the request was the reason they were coming. Because I told the truth. Because I didn't disappear. Because I refused to let someone else write the ending for me. A week later, we celebrated the 6-month anniversary of Lynn and Thompson Strategies with a rooftop gathering. It wasn't fancy, just food, laughter, music, and a team of people who'd bet on something different. We raised our glasses not to profits, but to principles, to honesty, to rebuilding with purpose. After the toast, Sophia pulled me aside. She looked out at the city, then back at me with the faintest smile. "You know what I love about this moment?" she asked. I raised an eyebrow. "What?" "You were never supposed to be here." I tilted my head. "Thanks." She laughed. "I mean it. You weren't groomed for this. You didn't network your way in or kiss the right rings. You just kept doing the work, kept standing up. And now you're leading, not because someone handed it to you, but because you earned it." I didn't have words, just a quiet nod. Before we parted, she leaned in and said, "The industry needed this. But more importantly, we needed someone to prove it was possible." That night, I stayed late at the office, the city shimmering through the windows. And I thought about the word that used to haunt me, grateful. Matt used it like a leash, like I was supposed to be thankful for being allowed to stay invisible. But now I felt something deeper, not the gratitude that comes from surviving, the kind that comes from becoming. I was grateful for the struggle, for the silence that forced me to find my voice, for the injustice that pushed me to draw the line, for the people who showed up when it mattered. I was no longer the quiet strategist in the background. I was Jack Thompson, CEO, mentor, builder. But more than that, I was a father whose son saw the truth rise. A leader whose journey wasn't defined by a fall, but by what came after. And even as the headlines faded and the noise settled and the industry recalibrated in the wake of it all, I didn't see this as the end of story. I saw it as the beginning of everything. If Jack's story struck a chord with you, don't let it end here. Share this with someone who's been overlooked, undervalued, or silenced for too long. Leave a comment and tell us. Have you ever been underestimated? And what did you do next? Subscribe for more real stories about resilience, justice, and the quiet power of standing your ground. Because the world needs fewer people playing along, and more people brave enough to rewrite the rules.